Hi, I'm Louis Ochoa, and you're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com.
Hi, everyone. John Liebman here. You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com, the premier site for learning bass online. My special guest this week is Louis Ochoa, and you're going to hear all about the amazing stuff Louis does. And let's get to it right now. Hello, Louis. How are you?
I'm great, John. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well,
Yes.
we're honored to have you. I'm honored to
Yes.
have you. I'm sure our audience would be very interested in hearing your background. You're from the Philippines originally, right?
Yeah, I was born in South Korea. I was raised in the Philippines. I moved to the Philippines at I was 2 years old. But so I was raised in the Philippines till I was 16. My dad, he's in the Navy, so he was stationed in South Korea.
South Korea. I didn't know that part of your bio. I did perform there on a tour about several years ago. I remember the Itaewon-dong.
I've no memory. I have no memory of Korea.
What I remember, most of the tour that I did that I was referring to was in Japan. And trying to find food, sake and noodles and all kinds of sushi and things that I don't even know what they were. We got to Korea, McDonald's, Wendy's, Dunkin' Donuts. Yay, okay.
Exactly. This is my kind of country. Everything is familiar to me.
Well, I want to ask you about your musical upbringing. Growing up in the Philippines, what kind of music were you exposed to? Tell me about your musical upbringing and how you became a bass player.
I remember growing up on like 80s pop, like Michael Jackson, but like new wave stuff, like I guess it's new wave, like Depeche Mode, Spandau Ballet, Duran Duran, that kind of stuff. And my mom, she was into like old school R&B stuff, Platters. She loved ABBA, Aretha Franklin. Well, my dad, he loved like mariachi music and Willie Nelson. So I had that, booming around the house as well. He's from Texas. He's a Texas Mexican. And he loved Willie Nelson and mariachi music. So I can't name like any mariachi artists. All I know is when I hear it is like, oh yeah, that one.
Yeah.
And I don't speak Spanish, so I never really understood what was being said. But that has like some formed a little bit of like music appreciation for me, having that kind of exposure as well. But then when I started learning music, I picked up guitar first because my brother was the one taking guitar lessons. So I'd kind of just watch him from the corner. The teacher would come to our house and he would learn acoustic guitar. And when they were done, I would grab the guitar and just start learning on my own from what I
Excuse me, you would have been about how old at that time?
This was like 9 or 10 years old, around 5th or 6th grade. And so I learned acoustic. I wasn't like really amazing at it. I knew chords, open chords, because that's all what my brother was learning. And I never really transitioned into, hearing about guitar players where it's like, oh, I got to learn like Van Halen. I got to learn like Kirk Hammett. I got to learn all these licks. I just like, these are songs that my brother learned, so I'm going to learn the same songs. Until high school when grunge hit. So Nirvana came on the scene and, everybody was like, have you heard Smells Like Teen Spirit? I'm like, what's this? I don't know what this Smells Like Teen Spirit. This sounds weird. So aside from that stuff, I also my neighbor was a huge metalhead. So I would go to his house. He was Japanese and he had all these like, imports from Japan that he would show me. As like, he had like, Metallica, Live from Budokan and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh man, this is so amazing. I never heard of like all this stuff just because, at home, I never really had that music. So I listened to heavy metal music. In my neighbor's house, he would have Metallica, Testament. I'd have these Japanese bands, Kokobat. I can't remember all of them right now. But Metallica was a huge influence on me. But then grunge hit and, everybody wanted to start a band and be like Nirvana because, they just looked cool and like they didn't care about anything. So bands were forming all over the place, and they heard I play guitar. I was like, hey, you could be our bass player, because nobody wanted to play bass. Everybody wanted to be the cool guitar player, and drums is just cool because you're hitting stuff. So I'm like, okay, I want to be a part of something. So I took off two of the strings of my brother's guitar so I could practice at home, because I didn't have a bass. I was borrowing a bass from a friend of mine. This awful action. I remember it had awful action. Strings were ancient. And
that'll build your muscles in your hands.
Yeah. And I remember we'd learn songs like Lithium and Smells Like Teen Spirit and Come As You Are. And Chris Novoselic had all these like slides going on all over the place. And I would shred my fingers. I would literally have blisters, cut them open, and just playing with just blood on. And I'm like,
such dedication.
I know. And I'm sure some bass players have some form of learning this kind of pain tolerance, but that was me. Just kind of like, this is how bass is played. You just grin and bear it, and you play because it's rock and roll. But at the same time, my neighbor learned that heard that I was playing the bass, and was like, hey, we should start a metal band. So, parallel to me learning grunge and alternative and Pearl Jam and Nirvana, I started playing thrash, Metallica, Testament, and then Pantera came along, and we played Vulgar Display of Power, which I guess just celebrated its like 30th year anniversary or something, or some other thing, 20th year.
Which I didn't hear.
Pantera's Vulgar Display of Power.
Okay.
That just celebrated some kind of anniversary. But yeah, learned Walk, played Cowboys from Hell. So yeah, I had like a metal cover band, and then I had my high school grunge band. So that's kind of my roots until, I had to learn jazz, because everybody said, hey, what about jazz songs? Like, what?
Really? Everybody was telling you that?
At Berklee. So
at Berklee. Okay. Yeah. I think you skipped ahead. Let's talk about you came to the US. You were 19, I think you said. So what brought you? Did you know anybody here? Was it to go to Berklee, or did you have anything lined up, or just decide to pick up and go for it?
So after high school, I was getting ready to go to college, just liberal arts, nothing fancy, in the Philippines. Then my mom passed away. So I was around 16 at the time.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah. And she passed away. I was wrecked. And my brother and my sister, my brother had, he was in college. My sister was already overseas. She was in New York staying already. My father was working in Guam. So my mom passed away while they were in Guam. I was in the Philippines with me and my brother were living.
We have a different perspective on what overseas means, but
I know, for me, anything, because I've never left the Philippines growing up. So Guam was like 3-hour flight from us. It's this tiny island. But my dad and my mom were working there, and my mom was, I forget what her job was over there, but she was working as well, but she passed away suddenly, and we had financial troubles at that time. So I had to drop out of college, move to Guam and work as well. I stayed there for 2 years, kind of dropped everything and just went there. I was just depressed, I was just very severely depressed. And, back then it was just being sad. That's how people saw it. But, now looking back, it's like, okay, I really kind of didn't want to be around anybody. So my dad, to cheer me up a bit, he knew, obviously he knew I loved music. So he got me a bass. I had a beautiful cream jazz bass that he got me. It's my first kind of USA made bass. In the Philippines, I had this awful knockoff that weighed like 80 pounds or something. But, it was perpetually out of tune. It was just, but I loved it.
It wasn't just your fingers that were hurting. Now your shoulder was hurting too, I bet.
But all that, that's how I kind of, I think, built up a lot of tolerance to, a lot of things that I learned how to deal with later on in, being a professional musician. But when I was in Guam, I didn't play music at all, but I still had my bass. So in between working, I worked as a waiter and busboy. I would just go home, shed. Didn't really, I had no interest in joining bands, even though I had friends who had heard me. It's like, dude, you got to join this band. They play at this hotel. I'm like, I don't want, because I played in metal bands. That's all I wanted to do if I was going to do music, is I wanted to be in that kind of scene. But Guam didn't really have a big metal scene. I moved to New York because my sister, she, she was just worried because I was still kind of not really, making any effort to make anything out of myself. So she brought me to New York. There actually is where kind of the seeds kind of took place. To get me going, she enrolled me in private lessons. I took private lessons with Keith Carroll in New York. I don't know if he's still there, but I have him to thank really for setting me on this path. I started playing in metal bands, and my private teacher, he saw my growth in bass. He encouraged me to go to Berklee. He encouraged me to go to music school, and I actually went and tried to go to Juilliard, and they looked at me like, "You're an electric bass player. We have no place for you." So I was like, "Where am I going to go?" And my teacher said, "Oh, go to Berklee." So
yeah, even their jazz program at Juilliard is relatively new. I don't think they're that progressive that they have a thrash bass department, thrash music department. But so tell me about the video game orchestra. You seem to really enjoy that. Lots of energy. What is that all about?
Well, video game orchestra is the rock orchestra. I would say premiere, because now it was birthed by our producer Shota Nakama and Berklee. It was a video game music ensemble, and now it was birthed there. And when he left Berklee, he took the idea and kind of built it up again. So yeah, it's an orchestra that is fronted by a rock band from 7 to 9 piece. It could be bigger a few times. And we play rock arrangements, I'd say rock orchestra arrangements of famous video game music. That's how it started. And now we've gotten to the point where we are recording for actual video game soundtracks. And, people who aren't into video games, they think, oh, it's like the plinky plinky sounds and whatever. You play to a bunch of kids. And it's like, oh, no, there's that. But video game music now is, it's a $60 billion industry, the video games. So the music has grown a lot more sophisticated, and the arrangements are so beautiful now. They have like amazing composers coming in, and Shota, he's a sick guitar player and a phenomenal arranger, and he takes care of all the arranging of all the music. So when it comes to us, I have a lot of leeway since it's bass. It's like, here's eighth notes, you go do what you want. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm just going to play bass lines all over the place. So for me, there's a lot of flexibility to kind of be musically creative, and it's high energy. And that's kind of what I love. A few times we've had, like with the backup singers, 2 keyboards, 2 guitar players. We have an electric violinist. We have a percussionist, we have a drummer, 2 singers, myself, and 2 guitar players. I don't know how much that was, but the full band, the full experience is that, plus a 60-piece orchestra or 100-piece orchestra. And for me, the best part of it is, aside from performing this music, it's really the audience members, because you don't have, when you're a famous band, you play for a crowd. They sing along and they know the music. But for video game music enthusiasts, their familiarity with the music extends beyond just listening passively. It was an active experience for them, because they're involved in the game that they're playing, and they have their own, how they internalize that music along with their game experiences. Just bringing the music to life in this way for them. You see,
what a cool concept for a band.
How their minds are just blown away just hearing this music in this kind of like larger than life way.
Tell me about your bass, your basses, the rest of your gear. What are you playing?
Oh, so my main bass now is the NS Radius bass. it's here. I don't know if I should, but it's this guy. This is my workhorse now. But
Well, that's NS Design, and they make
NS
some
Design.
incredible stuff. Tell me, why did you choose the Radius bass? What do you like about it? I've played them. I absolutely love them. But what do you like about them?
When well, before NS, I played in this in a kind of Dave Matthews type band a few years ago, John Hannafin band, and John Hannafin is a cellist, so he got in touch with NS for them to sponsor him. And Corey came down to one of our rehearsals or shows and approached me. I think the NS Design Radius was still kind of new, so he approached me and said, "Hey, do you want to be an artist for NS Designs?" And he says, "Well, it's okay. I mean, it's a cool concept. I wasn't really that much into the headless bass and the curved body design, but Corey was, he's a great guy, and he said, yes, it's nothing. He's just, why don't you try it? If you like it, great. We'll go on from there. If not, no big deal." So I was like, okay, cool. And it was, like any instrument, I think, and you've played numerous basses. No bass design, not one bass. It's not like easy enough to pick up another bass and say this is super comfortable also. So there was like a transition period for me. But once I got over that, just the evenness of the tone of from playing down here to up there, and just for me to, because I shift techniques a lot from slap to finger to playing tapping stuff.
Yes, you do. Like I said, like I keep saying, I've been watching the videos.
Yeah,
but it is, you do bring up a great point that the Radius is great for so many things, for slapping, for tapping. You do a lot of chords.
Yeah, but I play low B, 5-string basses, and what I love about the NS bass, I think it's 24 fret, right? Goes 2 octaves, and each note is just crystal clear, going up and down the neck. Like I said, playing chords, tapping, or even doing harmonics, like it just cuts through. But for the Radius, the NS Design Radius, it's, again, just I always go to it because it's such an even tone up and down the neck. I don't have to really EQ stuff afterwards. I could control my dynamics very easily, and technique wise, because shifting quickly between slap and finger style, knowing where to put where to slap, where to fit in your thumb in, because I do the kind of like the Victor Wooten, not necessarily up and down with the thumb, but going through instead of bouncing off the string, I go through the string, and then I kind of use my index finger as my kind of up pick instead of like the thumbnail. So just having, I know the instrument so well that I could get the exact sounds that I want out of it without having to struggle so much.
I'd like to ask you about playing bass and learning bass, because we're a bass instruction site for ForBassPlayersOnly.com. Pretty much the biggest. I mean, other people think that the other guy is bigger, but I've taught a lot more. And people are coming. Most of the people actually are men, although we do get a fair bit of women, but they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They're not career bound necessarily. They just want to play some of that great music from the 60s and 70s. They want to play some blues shuffles, maybe some walking bass lines, some classic rock riffs, just because they've always wanted to do it. Now they have a chance. So in that context, what advice do you have for someone who wants to learn to play bass? What do you think is important?
Consistency. Really, that's for any, I think, trade or whatever skill. It's consistency, because you could say, I want to learn to play the bass and spend 2 hours one day and skip 4 days and think you're just going to pick up where you left off. My advice is be consistent. And I'm not saying spend 3 hours a day practicing. You could spend 15 minutes a day practicing and get a lot more results doing that if you're doing it every day for the foreseeable future. If you're just spending 15 minutes a day just warming up your fingers, taking the song that you want to learn, play that a few times, and then move on to something kind of a little bit more, I guess, difficult, whatever. If you anything that you want to learn more, just do that. And that's really what's going to take you far. I could be in between gigs for months at a time, but I can't let go of my chops. So, for anybody learning, even if you're playing the simplest song in the world, don't think that, you can just learn it, put it aside, pick it up again a few days later, always come back to it. And then that'll also just drive you to kind of learn more and more and get, just more adept at learning songs, and you'll be much quicker at learning stuff as well. So
great advice. Been wondering, did you ever play upright as well?
I did at Berklee. I dabbled. So I do have an NS Design electric upright that I break out mainly for home studio stuff. Well,
what about all the lecture on consistency you just gave? Why
okay, this is also good advice. Know when something's not in your wheelhouse, because you could love to do something, but if you're gonna have to fight and just get discouraged. So that's how it was for me for upright. Obviously there's a part of me that says go back to it and learn it, but the electric bass, for some reason, it's got such a beautiful tone for me that I can't go and pick up another discipline and devote myself to that, because I'm still picking apart the smallest things that I could learn from a bass. I play guitar, I play keyboards, I play drums, but not on a kind of cerebral way that I want to get involved with electric bass.
What would you be if you were not a bass player? Something outside of music.
I love watching anime as well. I don't know if you know what that is. Japanese animation.
Japanimation?
Japanimation, anime. I grew up watching anime. My neighbor is Japanese. Was my neighbor. He's Japanese. So I'd go over and watch anime and read manga, Japanese kind of graphic novels. And, I love the over-the-top voice acting that they do in these cartoons. It's so wild. So that's for me is a pipe dream, where it's like, man, if I could do anything else, I'd be a voice actor, because I don't know. I just love changing your voice and being as goofy as possible for this cartoon that's hyper serious, at times, and then overly the top, just outrageous. So that's what I would shoot for. If I wasn't in music, I'd probably shoot for voice acting, not acting, like voice acting, because I don't think I could do acting. Yeah. But that for me is like, oh man, if I could do anything else, I'd be a voice actor.
Well, you've got such an interesting story. It was great getting to know you, and I thank you so much for coming on board and sharing your story with the audience of ForBassPlayersOnly.com. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful talking to you.
I wish you much luck and continued success. Louis Ochoa, thank you so much for joining us. I am John Liebman. You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com, the premier site for learning bass online. It's not for everyone. It's ForBassPlayersOnly.com.